For many Lexingtonians, the idea of making a day without using your car sounds pretty impossible, but that is exactly what city officials want you to try this week. Lexington is participating in a Week Without Driving initiative. WKYT's Alexa Minton got a taste of what organizers are hoping to see.
If you can drive or you own your own vehicle, you might not think about finding different means of transportation, whether that be walking, biking, or even public transit. But if you're part of the 1/3 of Kentuckians who can't drive, it's something you think about every day.
That is a large group of people who are living a completely different experience from you.
This week, Lexingtonians are challenged to participate in the Week Without Driving initiative and find other means of transportation, things like walking, biking, or public buses to get around.
Whether that's by choice, by need, by financial state, whatever that is, we're looking at what it's like to get around Lexington without your own personal vehicle.
According to WalkScore, a website that ranks the walkability of different zip codes in the U.S., Lexington identifies as a car-dependent city, with car congestion stifling opportunities to bike and walk. And it's that statistic that the folks behind Week Without Driving are hoping to change.
There are people who just need to get from place to place, and I think the more we can all understand the gaps in our transportation system, then the better equipped we are to talk about how to fill those gaps.
In an open letter to the community, organizers like Alice Hilton clarified that it's not a challenge that individuals compete in to successfully avoid driving for a whole week. It's more so a chance to identify and discuss barriers within our transportation system. And it's a conversation that Alice is hoping will get more people using public transportation like LexTran, or highlighting areas that aren't pedestrian friendly in the city.
We're all pedestrians at some point in our life.
At the heart of it, it's about people and getting people from start to finish, where they need to go, quality of life activities, and meeting a need of something that they may not have access to, or giving them an option for something different when they want it.
A city that is safer to walk in and bike in and take the bus in is just a better, it's a rising tide that lifts all boats.
In Lexington, Alexa Minton, WKYT.
And if you're interested in participating, there's a link right now on the city's website. Once signed up, you'll be digitally able to track your progress and receive reminders and prompts of transportation to try throughout the week.